Hello there. I'm delighted that you're joining me here in my studio. I'm Susan Clare, and your art group has decided to ask me to video the demo that I would have been doing for you this summer in real life. So I'm delighted to be painting an underwater scene in watercolor for you. And welcome to my studio. I am currently sitting out the COVID pandemic in Jamaica. My studio here is within my house, so I'm very lucky that I can continue to work while this is all going on and stay relatively safe and away from lots of people. So I do hope that you're safe and well too, and doing the best we can in this difficult situation. So hopefully we're going to bring you some bit of enjoyment and light-hearted entertainment today. So one of the things that I always do when I am considering what to paint is I have a look through my underwater references from the days when I was working full-time as a scuba diver. I have a particular interest in all things environmental, and that stems from the days when I was a keen first of all, scientist with an interest in the underwater world, and coming to Jamaica, I ran a scuba diving business, and a lot of our focus was involved in making the whole of the water sports industry much less destructive to the reefs. So we installed mooring balls and did lots of public education and that kind of thing. So I have quite a lot of references from those days, and also from friends who are still in the industry. So I thought I would share, first of all, my screen with you to show you the reference picture that I've chosen for today's picture. So we're going to be doing this in watercolor. And I think it's an interesting photo to me because it's not only a fish that is interesting, but it almost has an abstract quality to it. The stripes and the vivid color of the red that's catching on the body of the fish there, and all of those stripy spines that come out from the fish. Those it's called a lionfish, and I have to say he's one of my least favorite fish, but that doesn't mean that he's not interesting to paint, and we'll get on to that later as to why he's my least favorite fish. I'm going to see now if I can stop sharing that. I may come back and leave that with you so you see it as a reference in the corner of your screen as we go through today's session. I'm just making sure that's full. So one of the things I like to do is to start off with a thumbnail sketch, because when I start my painting, I want to be fairly free with it. I want lots of lovely flowy watercolors, and do like to throw around quite a lot of spatter and stuff like that. So if I put some more work into the planning before I start, it usually helps me to be able to be freer when it comes to doing the actual painting part. So here's my fish. Now you've probably noticed that this is reversed. No, it's not reversed. Okay, so my fish is there, and I do a thumbnail sketch for two reasons. It familiarizes me with the subject, and I can also work out where the lights and darks are going to go. And those two things between them will tell me whether it's going to work as a composition. And if your painting doesn't work with the large shapes just blocked in very quickly like this, then it's certainly not going to work when you add a lot of detail. So that's my first step, and that'll be a reference guide for me as I work through on transferring this image onto my paper. I've also listed out the paints that I think I'm probably going to use. I'm going to probably be using a bit of oil pastel in there in order to just speed up my painting process for a demo. You'll see how that works in a minute. And I'm going to try and keep to these four colors: Windsor red, phthalo blue or Windsor green blue shade, quinacridone gold, and indigo. I apologize if that's the wrong way around. I didn't realize I would be reversing it anyway. So I'm now going to, please bear with me, any technical hitches on this. think we're all in a learning curve when it comes to Zoom and which audio works with what and all that kind of thing. So I think I've got the hang of it, but bear with me if it's a little bit slow switching one camera angle to the other. Right, so where we're going is over to my studio view here. And no, before I do that, I'm going to screen share this reference picture and we'll see if this works. And while I'm doing that, we're going to also go over to the other view. And that's not going to work, is it? Is it? Maybe it is working and I can't see it. That's part of the problem. So sorry about this. It's a bit hard for me to know whether this is working or not. So I pinned that video. I don't quite know whether you're seeing it or not. So I think I was hoping to keep the reference picture in view for you, but I'm not so sure that that's going to work. I can't be sure that you're seeing what I need you to see. So we'll just switch over to the other camera now, and I'll join you on the other side. So this is my easel, and I work upright on an easel for doing demos. So I thought I would keep it the same way for you guys. I've got my reference picture here on the iPad so that it's handy for me to see. And I was hoping to keep it up there for you to see. If you're particularly keen to look at it while I'm going through the demo, what you could do is when you're watching this on replay, you can do a screen grab of the image where I first showed it to you. And then you can save that into your photos and look at it on a separate screen. And I think that'll work great for you. So first off, I'm going to need to use my thumbnail sketch and just put on a few lines. I want to keep this really, really to a minimum with the lines, because I am very aware that if I add in some mixed media into this, then that will immediately cause some problem with getting graphite lines into the other pastel areas and stuff. Now I want my focal point of my painting to be not in the center. I want it a little more over to the right here. And I know that the eye there is really the focal point for this fish, even though his face is almost obscured by the other fins that come, spines and fins that come in front. So just kind of indicating where they're going to go. And like I said, I know that you probably can't see the drawing very well. So this is a fairly boring part for you. So I'm going to absolutely keep it to a minimum. We're almost done. I also want to know roughly where the horizon line is between the edge of the corals and the sort of background water. So there's a lot of greenish coral in the background of this picture, which works well as a background for our red fish. But in actual fact, green is not a great color on reefs. And the reason for that is that usually green means algae, and a reef that's covered in algae is not a healthy one. So I'm going to try to skew the color of my reefs a little bit towards the kind of mustard color, because that's a color of a lot of live reefs, more oranges, reds, and of course you've got the blue of the water, so a lot of the yellower colors do end up looking quite green. I also need to add in some excitement into these spines by saving the whites. Now, if I were doing this as a take my time painting, I might have done it with using masking fluid, but I'm not doing that today. We're doing a demo and it's going to be fun and exciting and fast. So here we go. And I'm going to just put in some little marks. I'm using this is actually a white wax. Right, where's my, I didn't really want to use the wax. I want to use the pastels that are a bit better colors. Yes. So I'm just using ordinary, nothing very special quality in the way of a brand, just some oil pastels. And I'm going to use the lighter colors because after all, what I'm doing is saving lights. I'm also going to put in a few details in the foreground corals that have a lot of texture in them. This is supposedly a light gray. It looks so dark when you put it straight onto a white sheet of paper, but in actual fact, it's quite, and you'll see later when I've added some color to the page that it's actually quite a light color. So we're going to add some bits of coral. There's sort of a horizon line here where the fish is going through, and I'm just going to put in a few markers here so that I can keep my bearings as to what's where. And that's a little bit of a soft coral there that just looks a bit like a Christmas tree. So we'll just put in a bit of that so that I have a landmark there when it comes to putting in a lot of background. It's very hard to paint coral. I've done it for quite a few years and it took me a long, long time before I was anywhere near satisfied with the results I was getting. So now a lot of this background behind the red fish is going to be green. So I'm going to put in some stripes into the spines by putting the dark bits, some of the dark bits in, and then I can know where to put the white light bits. If I start with the lights, it's going to be very hard to know where I've been and to see where I need to go. So just going to give myself a bit of a basic guideline. The reason I like to do this in pastel and not just in a pencil line is that it can become part of the finished painting and it gives lovely, interesting texture. You'll probably already notice that because of the paper I'm using, it's just sitting on the tops of the hills and valleys of the paper. I should have mentioned I'm using Arches paper. It's extremely good quality, as I'm sure you know. And this is the 300-pound weight. So when I'm painting on it, I don't even need to tape it down. It's got this lovely deckled edge and I can just paint with lots and lots of water and it won't buckle or anything. Because they've got a lot of sunshine coming in this window. I'm going to put my lights on to counterbalance that. So we can get that to work. Okay, it should be a bit brighter on the sheet of paper there. So my spines are going to be coming up. I want to have an idea of where they're coming up, but I don't want to do them in entirely a solid color because that's what we're trying to avoid, is to get these lovely stripy effects. And one of the reasons why this fish is so successful, and we'll come into that a bit more in a minute, is of course that these spines with all their little zebra stripes on them make it incredibly hard to see exactly where the fish is, it's a camouflage setup, and so it's hard to see where the fish begins and ends. And you've got all these lovely I'm calling them zebra stripes. They are kind of like zebra stripes. Little dots and stripes that go, as they all turn away from the viewer, they sort of give this shimmery look. Now, this fish, this lionfish, is a fish that belongs in the Pacific. And while I'm doing this section of the drawing, which is probably not great for you to watch, I'm going to tell you all the interesting stuff about fish. So this fish originates in the Pacific, and that is where it should stay. But we're not really sure why. There's a lot of theories as to why this fish started invading the Caribbean back sort of in the late 80s, 90s. There was a whole series of hurricanes that went through Florida, and they think that a lot of aquariums were damaged, or people panicked and put their pet from the aquarium into the water, thinking that that would save its life. And a lot of them escaped. And the next part of the story is what's quite distressing, because the lionfish has no natural predators within the Caribbean system. So what happened next is that, as you can imagine, they reproduced in huge numbers. So there's no natural predators to keep their numbers down. In addition to that, they breed extremely fast, and they gobble up all the other baby fish. So it's sort of a three-pronged problem, because not only did we have our fish are already under enough stress from damage to the reefs, construction, pollution, golf course runoff, all those kind of things that are caused by man. And now on top of that, we have a new fish on the block who is gobbling up all the new babies that managed to get born and trying to survive before they have a chance to reach breeding age. So it's an absolute monster, no matter how pretty. So that's why I call, I have painted this fish before, but in acrylics, not this view, a different one, but I called it the painting, the dubious character, because although it's so beautiful, and you do get sort of charmed by the whole idea that it's such an amazing fish, but it is not doing any of us any favors, least of all the fish on the reef. And you might say, well, so what? He has a good dinner. Why does that matter? Well, one of the things is that the reefs are under pressure themselves because of all the same things: the pollution, extra runoff from laundry water and stuff like that pollutes the. Well, it acts like giving fertilizer to all the algae in the water, and of course, just like when you put fertilizer on a field, it makes all the weeds, it makes all the greenery grow. Well, underwater, we don't want that. The corals need to have that space for themselves, and they're much more slow growing than the algae. So what happens is that the algae gets to take over the space and the light, and grabs all of that stuff away from the corals, and the corals suffer as a result. So one of the things, that's another added disadvantage, that this fish is skewing the skewing the advantage towards the algae, because all the little fish that it eats up are usually the ones that graze on the algae and keep down the algal growth on the reef, sort of like the gardeners of the reef. And so, you know, you've got this triple whammy, really. And there's nothing to come along and eat the lionfish. So guess what? We can eat the lionfish. Lionfish are actually very tasty. They have a nice white flesh. The only problem, and I'm sure you can understand the problem just looking at it, is that there's not that many fishermen that are confident that they can handle catching it, especially as these fish they're so cocky, they just kind of sit there when you come up to them and look at you, because they have no predators, they're not scared. Which that does mean that if you can persuade some local fishermen to start using a Hawaiian sling and catching them, they make an excellent dinner. So that's what there is a big movement to try and educate people that they need to, whereas for a few years we've been telling people, no, don't eat the fish off the reef, they're needed on the reef. Now we're saying, If you can catch lionfish, eat as many as you can, because they are destroying the reefs and the rest of the fish population. So I developed a little saying. I'll go into another fish that is having a balanced existence with this one, is the parrotfish. Now the parrotfish is very helpful to the reef, and I'll kind of go on about that in a bit. But because people tend to overeat parrotfish in restaurants, it would be really great if we could eat lions and not parrots. And that sounds like a very strange sentence, but if you can remember it, it may help you when you're next in a Caribbean fish restaurant, or even, you know, as fish stocks start to dwindle worldwide, you're going to see a lot more strange fish becoming available on the menus. So look out for parrotfish. You'll be doing everybody a favor. So we've got some really strange stripes coming this way, and I want to try and save a little bit of those. I'm going to outline the white portion of this, the eye, that eye that's the stripes change direction as they come through here. It's very, very strange. And then the mouth of the fish is actually, it's quite an ugly fish. His jaw goes all the way down here behind this fin that we're not really seeing. That's got a big head compared to his body. So we've got some stripes going this way, and then they sort of change to that way. And we've got some stripes on the tail here. And then I really want to get on with the painting portion of this. The stripes do go in sets and have some very particular patterns, but I'm not going to get too much into that. I don't want to have to paint this as if it's, you know, I'm looking at every single stripe on the body or every single petal on a rose. You know, it's going to be more impressionistic than that. And hopefully we'll get the feeling across of the fish, if not every single biological aspect. I know I can do that kind of painting. I did it when I was a biology student for many years. So that is not something I'm now trying to achieve. I want my paintings to be more gestural and expressive, and leave the photorealism to some other people. I always think, you know, if you can get a good photograph, and it's so difficult to get good underwater photographs. I should mention that this one was taken by my next door neighbour. That's another funny story, and that's my neighbour there has become one of the foremost consultants within the dive industry in Jamaica for sandals and for training a lot of the instructors, which is what I used to do when I was in that business. And one of my last students before I gave up diving was in fact this man and his wife, my next door neighbours. And his wife is a fabulous artist. She's a sculptor as well. Her name's Janet Isles, and she was one of the people who's been instrumental in getting me to change my career and going full-time into becoming a professional artist. So we kind of switched roles, which was interesting and fun. And so this particular photograph was taken by Charles next door, and have his permission to use it, obviously. So I think I've gotten in enough detail there in my stripes that I can now be quite wild when I come to the painting portion. So I'm going to put a little bit more colour into, I've done the fish, I want to get a bit more texture into the foreground reef, just to break up some of these bigger areas of, I don't want it all to be just blue-green down here, when it's hard to tell. So I was saying earlier, it's quite hard to paint coral and to get some sense of structure into it. So we want to have a little bit more, you probably can't see it all that well, which is why I'm hurrying through this stage, because it's not incredibly interesting to watch. So I just want to put in a few little bits of texture into the reef to help me understand that it's reef and not just well, some of it could be stones and rocks. But we've got the kind of variety and growth patterns that they make there. We want to keep this yellowish mustardy color to the foreground because one of the things that happens underwater is the light's quite different. And as you move away from the subject, everything turns fairly blue-green fairly quickly. So all the rules of perspective that you know about from being a good artist don't tend to apply. Well, they're sort of magnified and exaggerated underwater. Everything gets blue-gray much quicker, and it tends to go to that intense blue rather than a grayish blue in the distance. Your light source is nearly always from directly above. Here we've got a bit of illumination on the front of the fish as well from the flash that the photographer has used. That's why we're getting that lovely rosy red glow, which otherwise would be looking rather, everything that's red usually underwater, if you don't have any light on it, is going to be looking just sort of a dark blackish grey-green kind of colour. Bit more colour into those stripes in the middle there. I don't want to have so much contrast. I'm going to put in the background. Okay, we'll put a little bit more in there. And I might be done with the just putting a few bits of sense of horizon there. Okay, so I'm done with my mixed media section. When I'm painting, I do love to use large brushes. So I'm going to start with a wash brush. That's a 2-inch polar flow. It's been a bit damaged, but it doesn't stop it from working quite well otherwise. I've got my big ice cream container for water here. I've got a large well palette with lots of deep wells in it for the colors, and I like to space them around almost like a color wheel. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be using phthalo blue, Windsor blue green shade. I'm going to mix down some nice big puddles of these so that when I'm ready to go, I don't have to come back and remix. You can get a lovely flowing wet into wet effect going on. So I want a nice big puddle of blue, even though there's not a lot of that blue showing. It will come into the other areas. This is just my clean water. Okay, I'm going to mix down some quinacridone gold. I love this yellow because as you can see in the palette, it looks almost brown there. But when you water it down, it can go from the palest, softest golden yellow right through the spectrum into quite a rich brown. So for that reason, I think it's really, really versatile. And I love the golden glowy look that it gives to the underwater corals. It's much more akin to a natural coral color than, say, a cadmium kind of yellow would be. And so for red, I'm going to be using this Windsor red, very simple Windsor red that flows beautifully. I don't know that I need that out in the palette as yet, but I'm just mixing some down into the well so that it's ready to go when I need it. And I'll reserve, I usually have a different brush for each color because I don't like to waste paint. So the less I can wash out and throw down the sink, the more stays in my palette to be used another time. So that's my basic 3 colors that I'm going to use. I may use some indigo later on to get some of the darks to be reinforced, but as I think for right now, that's enough. So when it comes to deciding where to put my washes, I know that the 2 corner areas, you can see I've got some blue still in this wash brush. There's a lot of distant blue water that's kind of visible off in the corners. So I'm just going to move my clips for a minute in like that and make sure I'm wetting the paper thoroughly. Now, because I'm in a hot studio, I may need to do this a little more than you, but even when I demonstrate in England in the summer, I quite often spray down my page or add water like this, maybe even 3 times over. I'm going to mostly keep to the background areas and the foreground at the moment. I don't want blue to go into my nice red fish, even though one of the tricks of successful underwater paintings is not to have a sort of a cutout fish that is isolated from the rest of the water, the rest of the colors going on around it. So I will be integrating the colors a bit later, and I'm not worrying about dribbles. That can take care of itself. Picking up a little bit of that pastel, that's not a big deal. I want this to be nice and soft and flowy. Okay. So going in now with some of the blue that I've mixed down, I'm going to start off in the corners, and the idea is to let this run. I mean, we're depicting water and we're using water, and that should mean lots of lovely flowing and running, right? I think one of the hardest things to do with watercolor is to let it go without interfering. There's a lot of dark in the back, the middle section here, which is going to show up these spines nicely. In order to get them to show up, we need to have something behind them. And whilst in the photograph, it's not exactly blue, the blue is going to build towards creating that dark. So I'm just going to let it flow in there and around here. Again, a lot of the colors that we see in the foreground reef, if they're not our bright yellow, bright ochreish yellows and mustards, they're going to be green. So I'm not worrying too much about drips. I think everything adds to the feeling of underwater. So I'm not also not worried if I get extra blues around the place that then need to converge with some yellows in order to get a green look. That's fine. I want a bit more blue up here. You can see already those spines are starting to stand out, and the patterns in between will need to be, it's like you're looking through the spines. In some ways it's almost like they're transparent and you're seeing the background color coming through. So if we do get that color coming through, it won't matter. I always have a piece of tissue in my hand to gloss up unnecessary bits. I think this is the funnest part of watercolor, is when you're at this stage and you can really let go and get some exciting things going on. So I'm just, as I said, letting some blues. There's going to be a fairly dark area under the whole of here. So it's sort of like this, the shadow that lets you know that the cat's sitting down on the mat, that kind of a feeling. So we will be having a dark area there beneath the fish. So that blue again will build into creating that dark. So at least you can see the outline of my fish now. And the pastel has that nice sort of rugged look to it, which I think helps to get across the idea of these spines, striations and patterns within the spines. Okay, while I've got that, I'm going to put down that blue brush, pick up yellow. I'm going to go in the front here with quite a bit of yellow, because a lot of the foreground of the reef, this does two things actually. Yellow is such a great color for putting on the front foreground portion of a painting, because it brings the whole foreground forward towards you. So even if it were not conveniently that convenient that a lot of corals are yellow, it would might be a color that I would have chosen to use even if it wasn't the exact local color, just because it pulls the foreground towards you. Now in my actual reference picture, there's a lot of light yellowy coral here. I don't particularly want to put that in because I want the dark color there to show up the brightness of the stripes and the light eye, I think. So I'm not going to put too much yellow over there. No, we do want some. And here, let's put this one in. This lighter coral head here. Okay, when you're working vertical like this with a lot of liquid, you do want to pay attention to the bottom edge because it's quite easy to get cauliflowers and runbacks if you just let them all do their own thing. And there's a lot of greenish yellow coral right there beside that, underneath that, and we've got a lot of the reef up here. You can see as I'm adding that yellow into the blue, it's automatically turning to quite an interesting green. And that's sort of your middle distance green there for it in coral speak. Again, you've got some, I'm trying not to get too much in the way of detail into these structures because when you're swimming past or a fish is swimming past, you don't really pay that much attention to the exact structure of the reefs. You're sort of looking at the flash of color and movement, and the rest tends to, you know, it's like watching something go by from the window of a bus. You're not that focused on exactly how many chimneys there are. You just know that there's some structures that look like houses. So in the same way, we want to indicate reef without getting too bogged down in how many bits of this and that and what's the exact texture on the surface and all of those things. So I should also mention one of the people who's been instrumental in inspiring me to paint this fish is Dr. Dane Buddo. His name is spelt B-U-D-D-O, and he's a researcher formerly of the University of the West Indies Marine Lab Station, where in Discovery Bay. I used to run a dive operation just about 5 miles from there. And we had an awful lot to do with the Marine Lab, which was also the center for, you know, if there were any dive problems, that's where you would need to go. So we were very supportive of everything they did. And in more recent years, Dane Buddo is somebody who has been instrumental in leading the research on lionfish and this whole, the fact that they have become an invasive species, and you know, documenting how damaging they are, how widespread across the Caribbean and within our waters and other Caribbean waters. And he has been really, really great at helping to spread the word amongst the tourism dive industry that it's okay to catch and eat lionfish. So one of the things that the tourist resorts can benefit from is a new source of lovely fish to eat. And of course, it's all about education. If you tell people this is a wonderful new fish, you must try it, and the gourmet chef prepares it for you, then it's a whole different experience than if you're sort of worried about, is this thing going to poison me? And you may be actually saying to yourself right now, but it's got all those spines, aren't they dangerous? Well, here's the thing about the spines. The spines are venomous. That's a technical term for something that if it sticks you, it will create an irritation and hurt. There is nothing poisonous about the flesh of the fish. So you can eat the flesh And even if it's been in contact with the spines, if it's been cooked, that will get rid of any of the irritative proteins in the venom. So as long as it's been roasted or grilled to a normal fish eating temperature, you'll be safe. Because the other thing is that the fishermen now are getting ways so that they can, for their own safety, they need to be able to catch the fish and immediately cut off the spines that have the venom on them. So the dorsal fins that come up here and the side ones, I think, that are the ones that have the venom in them. So they get rid of those very quickly. And so the rest of the fish is quite safe to handle. And then, of course, to process for eating. So you don't need to worry about that part. So just looking back, I've got some nice runs and a bit of integration between my colors there. I think I need a bit more yellow mixed down. I'm noticing quite a lot of dark back here. I don't know if I want it that dark, do I? We will, I think we'll add a bit more into this, some intense colors. You can see how I'm using a dry brush technique to make the most of the texture on the surface of the paper, this gorgeous paper. And that's going to stay there and show through when I add some more color on top of it. Another thing I'm going to do, which I can't resist, is I love using spatter. So I'm going to add some spatter now. Now, if there's an area you really don't want to get spatter on, you can always save it with a nice piece of tissue or something, but I'm not that fussed. At the moment, we're just working on the background. We want some movement and some excitement in there. And this can help to create some of that. Bit more texture and excitement. There we go. So I think maybe time for a bit of, I'm going to put a little bit more blue in before we turn to our reds. I have an idea of whether I'm just mixing down a bit more richer blue. I had a fairly light mixture before, which was for the distant background, see? And so some of these areas that I want to be quite dark because they need to show up the light spines. That's interesting. I want there to be some interesting bits of coral right there. So that's fine. I want it to connect with the bottom there. This whole area is full of some quite dark fins underneath the fish. So we'll have that as quite dark. Mop that up a bit. And I want this kind of horizon level to carry on through there. So I want this part to be fairly dark. You can see some lovely greens being created there. The texture. Nice strong blue greens, Caribbean Sea. These are a bit dribbly. Some behind here is quite dark. I don't often use phthalo blue as my blue of choice, unless I'm doing underwater, because I find it rather too turquoisey and strong for most flowers and stuff. So it's quite nice to be able to let go and use it to full extent up here. Right, I'm going to, again, do a bit stronger blue to connect to the top here. I think we need that connection. and it will help to create the contrast with those beautiful white spines there. Going off into the distance. And here we've got some more. I'm going to stop doing blue in a minute. You noticed I've only used 2 colors so far. And I will give us a chance to put some reds in and see how those interact with the colors I've already created to create some more colors and get our focal point all beautiful. One of the disadvantages of these lovely mop brushes and squirrel hair is that they do shed rather a lot. Okay, again, there's some distant stuff going on at the corner there. We don't really want the corners to be too light because take the attention away. May put some darker blues back into there when we've created more depth. This little bit here comes down. Okay. Now, I'm thinking I want to let that settle down just a little bit before I move on to the reds. I don't want the reds, well, actually I do want some of the reds to blend. Let's pick up some red right now and do some exciting stuff with red. I also want to have my clean water brush handy and a new piece of towel because I may need to soften some things. I'm going to start by putting some clean water on here. I want that to be reddish but not strongly reddish. So I'm going in with this as a sort of main body color, which we will then adapt as needed. So the colors at the end of the tail here are eventually going to be a combination of light and very dark. But for right now, I want to just get the sense that they are part of the fish. So they have this reddish purpley tint to them rather than just being part of the water. Okay. And we're moving up here with the more intense color. I'll add a bit more plain water onto the part that has whites and less red, so that it immediately gets diluted down as you put it on. And here there's this complicated bit with the fin turning on its side, so you sort of see it but don't see it. You can see some of these marks that I put on with the pastel are showing up beautifully, and some of them are getting a bit more lost. So now the one thing I have noticed with this reference picture, which may cause problems, may not, we'll see, is that normally when you paint something that's curved or rounded, the colors get darker as they turn away from the light. Just think about painting a ball or a teacup. When the curve goes away from the viewer, that's where you tend to add the dark shading. With this fish now, as you turn away from the body of the fish is where the rich color is, the darker color. And as you turn away from it the curve goes away, it's catching more sunlight from the upper layers of the water, so it gets lighter on the top and maybe a bit darker on the lower sections, but it's quite different to what you're expecting instinctively. So just bearing that in mind. And we'll have a little bit of this colour through here to indicate that that's his jaw, carrying on through there. And some of these stripes will get very much darker. Just put the red in through the centre of his eye in place of what will be a dark colour. And of course we want some connection between the spines and the body. So I'm just going to create a few little dribbles in purples and things there. And that purple should be a great colour for the base of the spines. Bit more red. There's a lot of red coral in the reference picture down here, which I'm finding particularly distracting, so I'm not going to put it in there. The thing is that we don't want to have the red only in fish, because then that's just crazy. It looks too isolated and doesn't make any sense. So I will have to put some reds into other places. And because this red is going to build into the purpley colours that become the in-between colours for the whites. So I'm going to just let it do that thing there. And add into the lower sections here. And then we will need to find some places in the coral where we can have little bits of red. Red in the sea is generally not a very attractive thing. It looks almost like something is bleeding. So we don't want to have a lot of it, but we do also need some integration between the fish and its background. So yeah, there needs to be some reds and purples in the background, even if they're not very bright red. So also the red is going to build to create some real nice darks in this area. These lower fins on the fish, and I think that's helping to, you can see the sort of pattern coming in now from that. There's a lighter bit here, but it's not that bright. Okay. Take my own advice, when it starts to get scratchy, you pick up more paint. You'll notice that I do tend to like to let my colours mix on the paper rather than in the palette. I'm not mixing up any shade of anything on my palette, and that's deliberate. I love when you get these natural combinations and runs occurring, and I think you really can't even hope to come close to replicating that when you try to mix a color in the palette. It just looks so dull compared to the natural ones that occur. That's my theory of color mixing. Okay, so I do need a bit more dark back here, so it's purple, even though I don't want it to be bright red down there. We can have some of this purple color reaching back into the reef to give it a sense that it's shadowy underneath the fish there. Okay. I think it needs to turn up a bit more. Between the coral heads, shadows and crevices. This section here is, I'm I've now got more red than anything else, but I'll come back and add some more blue because this is also an area that's very dark with just a few bright spots of white on it. And in fact, underneath of this, where the fin is turning horizontal, these fins become so that you're then looking at one foreshortened, which is why it's a bit misleading. Well, that also needs to be a good strong color, even though it's not really red. We're going to use that red to build towards the purpley color that belongs there. Okay, and then that can also blend out into the reef. Starting to get a sense of a floor. That round bit is too round. Okay, so while that is, I need to put a little bit more blue into that section right here before I let it settle down. Okay. Don't do that. Looks like it's threatening to dribble. We want that connection to the bottom to come through. Yeah. Could come through there. That's better. Okay. All right, and these need a bit more depth of colour behind them. Okay, so and of course I didn't take my own advice and watch out for cauliflower, so there we have one right there. But actually I think we can make that into something a bit more integrated. That could be fine. It's rather nice. Okay, these two not dribble quite so bad. And when I walk away from that and squint, I sort of am starting to feel like it could be coral. So I'm going to just make sure my brushes are not going solid with colour, and I'm going to let that settle down and dry for a minute. And in the interim, I'm going to take you on a little journey of my studio and explain a couple more pieces. So if we can move this. Let's do a close-up of this so you can see what more about of the texture that's being created in here. So you can see the spines on the fish standing out a bit more, bright red. We've got some of the texture in the foreground in these corals here. You can see with the pastel has created those. And a lot of texture is created with the dry brush technique I was using. Pulling back, get the overall effect again. Okay, so I thought I would let you see some of the other paintings that I have in my studio. Let's start with this one. This one is a parrotfish. And I did mention the parrotfish earlier. This one is a stoplight parrotfish. Stoplight in America is like a traffic light. So you can see this one's red. It's a nice, pretty red fish. There's a lot of texture and similar technique that I've used in the background and the foreground to create this fish. And The interesting thing about this fish, I mentioned it's a favorite on the menus. The problem with that is that this fish is female. She has about 4 years of laying eggs as a red female. And then she grows more and she turns green and she becomes a male. It's what's called the super male phase. So that's what happens with parrotfishes, is that if you are a fisherman and you think you're being good by only taking the larger of the fish, or you take this nice well-grown female that looks like she's had a few years of laying, if you now take her, or you take only the big ones, those big green ones, what you're actually doing is depriving the whole population of the ability to breed, because there'll be no males. So it's quite a drastic impact that has on the population. Right, so I'm going to go to my smaller paintings over here. As you can see, I'm quite fond of painting underwater things. A lot of these are in acrylic. At the moment, I have a new program going called Immersed in Water Media with Susan Clare, and it's on a Patreon site. If you're not familiar with Patreon, patreon.com is like a community website where creative people can host a website. Mine has 4 different levels of membership, and you can choose at what level you'd like to support or join in the things that we do. Some of the things that we do are, you can just join it and support me like you're getting a magazine, that sort of price once a month, cup of coffee kind of price, and you get sneak peeks into my studio, what I'm up to, some of the conservational type things that I'm supporting. You can see I've done quite a lot of turtle paintings, and coincidentally this week on the 20th, Wednesday, it was the 23rd of May, was World Turtle Day, and that's particularly of interest to me. Here's a watercolor one I've done, because my goddaughter Anya is a volunteer who goes out to Greece and helps look after the turtles in Kefalonia, and I'm so proud of her. She's a marine biologist and she's giving her time voluntarily for these programs. She's been doing it now for about 4 or 5 years, and she's actually in charge of one of the areas now. This is a little hermit crab, so he's got some really exciting colors and movement going on there. I do like this contemporary look in acrylics. Another splashy watercolor there, some spade fish. Don't see many of those on the reefs these days, and you see them on the deep reef, the deep dives very often. This is a very abstract sort of looking pelican here. So some of these are projects that we've got going on Patreon. You can join my painting club, Immersed in Water Media Painting Club, on Patreon, and I'll provide a link for you to go and have a look at that. So what we're doing is about 3 times a month, I'll give you a fully recorded video how-to, and then every week we do a Zoom seminar in which you can join in whichever country you're in. At the moment, it's so much fun because I've got some people from Jamaica and some from England. And it's lovely to see everybody sharing on the call and saying hello to each other and getting to know each other, like making friends across the world in a time when you're so limited for company. It seems kind of like a nice thing to do. This turtle here, let's see if we can get a better picture of it. Okay, this one is a card here, but I have this image. This turtle is called Anya's turtle. It's a painting that I did the original for her graduation gift, and it's an acrylic again. I have this image on my website available in prints, so if you're in England you can order it even though we're in lockdown, because it will come straight from the printer, and there are a couple of different sizes. But no matter what you buy with this image, if it has this image in, I will give 10% to the turtles and support the turtle work that Anya's doing in Greece, in Kefalonia. Here are some other projects that I did with students. So that's why some of these are student level projects that we're doing on the Patreon site. So you can see you can have a lot of fun, and I'll be telling you every step of the way, introducing new materials and ideas and discussing classic ideas, and then, you know, how to break the rules sometimes, all that kind of thing. And we're having a lot of fun with it. So do go and check that out. I was supposed to have an exhibition here in Jamaica at a prestigious hotel in March, and I was working very hard towards that. So I do have a collection online at the moment, which you can watch. If you go to my Patreon site or my website, you can watch a YouTube live half-hour video where I did a walkthrough of my work in some depth of explanation. So this is one of the pieces that I did. I've really focused on seascapes and underwater, a lot of texture in this piece. And this one is an underwater one where you can really see what happens with the light when you go underwater. There's quite a different atmosphere with the light from when you're looking into the distance on land. So you've got that deep blue water in the mid distance. And this painting has a lot of extra texture in it. This is not real coral, I have to tell you, because I would not do that to take live coral out of the sea. This is something that's giving the impression of coral. It's plant material. So I have suggested that the reef is starting to get bleached, which happens when the water is too warm, and the effects of the runoff of construction are putting extra pressure on the reef, and the poor reef can't manage. And one of the symbiotic relationships it has with algae that it live within its body breaks down, and they can't, it's like they have their own little farms inside their bodies, and they can no longer maintain that. So they sort of starve to death basically and become skeletons. So that's happening to an enormous amount of the reef that we have left in the world these days. I think our reefs in Jamaica are currently at about 10% live reef, which sounds quite dire. I can remember when I was still diving every day, we had an expert come and assess the reef, and he told us that we were down to about 35, 45%. And at the time we were dismayed because we thought we had about 80% live reef. So even, you know, that was 30 years ago. I mean, it's an ongoing struggle. We've been struggling since those days, and it's just getting worse. Our lifestyles these days, the pressure that was even before plastic was a problem in the ocean. So if you want to do your little bit to help, remember to eat lions and not parrots next time you have a choice on a menu. Let's come back to the painting and see what's the next bit to do. So it's very warm in my studio this afternoon, and that fan doesn't seem to be doing much. Anyway, so we need now to get some deeper color into the fish. We want some stronger patterns to be visible. And we need to create some more of these lovely dark purples that are happening in a few places that are strategic to the structure of what we want to see. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to add some, I'm going to use my flat brush, 1-inch flat brush, and I'm going to pick up some of the, I think I'm going to go into indigo. Indigo is such an amazing color to get darks to happen. So we're going for indigo, and we're going to include it with some of this red. And we're going to get some of those lovely dark stripes to happen. Now with a flat brush, of course, you can create these you've got almost a knife edge there. So you can get quite straight lines with just a touch. Don't have to draw them and your hand go all wobbly like that. You can just touch the color in there and you've got a straight line. I do love that about using a flat brush. Okay, so I'm starting at the tail just because that's sort of an end point to start with. And one of the things that's going to help to tell us that this fish is rounded is the curve that these lines make, because they're going to be more curved as the body of the fish bellies out towards us. And that will help to identify what's going on there. So some of these lines do actually go right up to the top there, even though the general colour of the fish is lighter up there. And we've got some of these stripes joining in together. Okay, I need more colour here. I could go to a smaller brush for this and just do it with much more detail finally, but that wouldn't be any fun. I like to see if I can create things with the least amount of brush strokes, sort of like it painted itself. So here we've got one of these ones that doesn't go all the way through. Don't know enough about these fish to know if that's specific, like if they all have exactly the same pattern within the species, or if it's something that's individual, like a fingerprint. That would be interesting to know. I must ask my friend, Dr. Dane. I'm sure he'll know. So by highlighting the outer edge where it touches the white portion that I put on earlier, I'm getting those fins to look like they're sort of a little bit transparentish, even though they're dark in color. Okay. Back into my indigo and set down a little bit more. I'm not putting a lot of water with this because I do want it to be intense. This is where the details are going to pop out because of using this. I'm going to now leave that middle section for a bit. I don't want to have to do every single line in minute detail. So I'm looking for the important bits. The eye is important, and this stripe that goes right through the eye at this funny angle. And when you see that go in, all of a sudden you know where the eye is, don't you? And then this takes a downturn like that. And then right behind the eye, we've got a set of stripes that go this way. And in front of the eye, we've got a set of stripes that go down towards his nose, or down towards his mouth that way. So I'm just suggesting those. And it's funny how the stripes actually go straight through his eye in several places. But because of the way they move the contours on either side of the eye, you can see exactly where the eye is. It's quite interesting. And then this one, by the time we get up there, we've got one that's going straight across the entire fish. It's not a perfect straight line, but it goes around like that. Okay. And then we've got some little suggestion bits in between. Another wide stripe that's very dark, I can see, is coming from just in front of the first fin there. So if I can get 2 or 3 of these definitive ones in the right place, then I'm hoping that I can just sort of suggest the rest without having to do everything by the book and work out the exact placement of them. Again, we're changing angles with the belly and also the strange patterning, because some of these are wibbly wobbly going through the fish in the water. Some of these skinnier lines are less obvious to work out what they're doing. These are all a bit much the same size. I need to make one of those at least a bit wider. The sense that that pattern is still happening. I really can't see the ones on the front there. Just a hint that there's something there. It does have some little growths and bits sticking out of the top of his snout there. To make sure that the eye is outlined quite clearly with those dark lines so that we can see where it is. It doesn't exactly have a black line around it, but it should be fairly obvious where it's going. There we go. Right, moving back into the body of the fish now. We need some going this way. And then we've got this sort of splits into two wibbly wobbly lines coming down. So it needs to be a bit more solid. We have some suggestions in there too. And yes, these ones actually converge, I think. And more. It's hard to tell if these are, I think there are two sets of fins. There are some going that way and some going this way. So it's kind of hard to tell whether the dark line lines up with the fin or with its opposite, if you know what I mean. But it's hard to tell anyway. Bring that right up into the fins. There. So we're getting the gist of the patterning on the fish here. Taking me a little longer than I'd anticipated, sorry about that. It's a matter of working my way through and getting it done. And we're getting there, we're almost there. If anybody is interested in diving, I know that PADI, which is the organization I used to teach through, they have, you know, they're one of the better organizations for accrediting dive training. And they now actually offer training in how to catch lionfish and how to prepare them to cook and eat them. I think that is wonderful, because if we can just re-educate the palate of our eating fish public, it could make such a difference to the health of the reefs, not just only the fish populations. And of course, the health of the reefs impacts the inshore areas like beaches. So it could be beneficial for many, many reasons. The mangroves that protect from storm surges and all of that, they're all affected when the little fish are being gobbled up too fast. So we need these dark colors to start to extend back up into some of the fins, the spines here. I think that's beginning to look like a fish. And I'm not sure if I can do this just by taking the shortcut. Maybe we'll do it with the side edge, get the sense of those very fine bits of the fins that are almost transparent going back out there. The little dots in. Okay, and then we have some more, these ones, yes, connect up with the dark bits here. So we want to connect that through and let some of these dark patches become more stripy looking there. Almost disappearing into the water there. Another one going up that side. This is where the work that I put in earlier should be paying off. If the pastel has held its ground, then this should be an easy job to do, because it will be just done, half of it will be done for me. So we're getting the sense that there are some tigerish looking stripes on those spines there. Yeah, coming through there. I want these to be sort of shimmery and half there. I don't want them to be very, very obvious. That's exactly what the lionfish is like when you see it in the water. Sometimes you don't see it at first because they don't move fast at all. They just kind of hover, because they don't need to worry about running away since they have no natural predators. So that's what happens. They just lurk there, and because their fins are so shimmery and transparent and almost not there, you're not actually sure if you're seeing it or not to start with, and then you focus on it and go, oh yes, there's one of those rotters. And believe me, these things are the babies are about 3 inches long, and those you can find even in swimming areas. So do watch out if you're swimming on a beach that's not very well kept or anything, because the babies will lurk in the inshore areas, and they'll give you a nice sting if you stand on them or something. But the bigger ones that you see on the deeper reefs are over a foot, like 18 inches across. They are massive. A lot of good meat on them. So we do want to get people eating them. Okay, I'm going to step back from my painting for a bit. I like to do that from time to time. Okay, I'm seeing a low battery warning, so where's my plug-in thing? Which it was plugged in. Okay. Let's hope that's still been working. So yes, standing back and looking at my painting, I'm seeing that it's looking a little bit heavy on the indigo, but that may be because I haven't got any of it in the rest of the reef yet. But I am getting a sense of some detail and focal point, I think. I like how those top spines are kind of shimmery and disappearing into the water. I still need to do the lower ones on his tail. His tail's kind of curling back on itself, so we've got part of that tail that's curling in here. You're not really seeing the full shape of the tail, but the lower spines that are radiating out here, you're sort of seeing those, and then it turns back on itself. And these have the lines of stripes across them, like this. Some of these look like they need to have a little bit more of that up there as well. Just not across all of them, but And again, they're sort of fading out into the water and just leaving some of the white bits to shimmer closer to the body. And I'm going to just pick up a bit more of that colour to blend into, just as we blended the spines into the body here, the same thing needs to happen down here to get that to look a bit more continuous. There we go. And same on the upper side here, we'll just extend those out a little bit, like they're going off somewhere into those white sections. Around here, there's a little bit a sense of a change from the body to the surroundings, and a bit more dark right there. I think that might be enough on the fish for right now. So I want to introduce some of this darker blue into some of the areas of the reef, just to make it look like it's a part of what's going on. So some of these pockets of shadow here can really definitely sit down with that. And this section behind here. I'm going to switch brushes here, back to my nice mop brush. I really prefer my mop brush unless I'm trying to do stripes. So picking up a little bit more of the indigo now, but not very heavy like I have on the fish. I just want to plop it into a few of these places that were rather red, because really, as I said, red's not a great color to be having as an obvious color in the water. Looks too much like blood in the water. So just tone that down a bit, and we look like we've got some more so that sort of horizon of coral that goes through there. It's quite nice. And that actually brings us right down into the behind the fish there. That colour does, in the reference picture, it follows right up to the top of the page, but I think I don't want to make it too heavy up there. Step back again and see what's needed here. So definitely in front of the face of the fish needs something. And I had decided not to put yellow in here because I thought it would be too similar to the... And now I'm thinking maybe the yellow might lighten it up a bit there. Let's see if that helps to bring some attention over this way. It might help to bring the attention over there. Definitely a contrasting colour to the face. I think part of the problem is that I've got pink with the dark instead of white with the dark. So I want to increase the dark on the features there, on the face of the fish. So we're going for more indigo and a little bit of the red with it, so that really gives us a good deep, deep purple. And I want to make this really, make these slightly broader, these stripes here, so that we get a lot of contrast there. And that should help to make that known as the focal point. think it's a shame that we can't see the lower jaw. Oh, there is a bit of, there, we just put that in. There's a bit, sort of a, he's got like a drop jaw bit. We should be able to see through there. That sort of makes more sense of his face now. There we go. Just dab that off a bit because you're looking at it through the transparency of that fin. Okay. And I think this one also has to be a little bit more dark in some of these fins as they start to move away from. There we go. This bit goes like that. So this lovely deep purple, I'm actually going to even add more red into it because the depth of color on the body part here should be really quite dark, so that you're barely seeing the colors of the stripes between it. That looks like I've absolutely flooded it all out right now, but remember that these colors dry lighter. So when this starts to dry, it's probably going to recede quite well. And let me see the patterns again, I'm hoping. Okay. How does that look from a distance? Are we getting a sense of the fish? Yeah, I think that's sort of getting there. So there's a bit of dark in this reef over here. It sort of helps to define where the edge of the fish is. Because my fish is so dark, I don't want to put a lot of dark into the reef, but just maybe to get it a little bit more contoured here and there. These things need to look a little bit more integrated. The whole of this needs to dial back. I want that to be my main bright white. And I'm going to put a little bit richer blue into my corners, just because they are Caribbean blue sea. They're not looking all that rich at the moment. Also help to make the fins, the spines stand out just a little bit more. And a bit more over the other side. Of course, I do like the idea that the lighter portion is up where towards the lights, but we don't want that competing for attention with the lights on our subject. So I'm going to dial it down a bit and let it take the back seat. Okay. I'm coming to the end of the work I'm going to be doing on this. I'd love to put a bit more spatter in just because that will help to unify what's going on. A little bit into these damp areas of sort of undefined reef and background. Of course, you can always spray onto this if they look too obvious, so that it just settles down a bit more into the background. When you're doing spatter, I always like to practice first, usually, to get an idea of what kind of spatter this brush is going to produce, because they're all going to be different. Something I'm needing to see here is more definition behind the edge of that tail. So I'm just going to unify that a bit more with background there. Let's see if we get that tail shape to stand out a bit more. The thing I'm not really seeing that I wanted to see was the a brightness around the face. So I'm going to do something that's a bit naughty. I'm going to add some yellow to his face, which isn't really there, but I just want it to create a bit more of a glow than we've got. That might help to make it stand out a bit better. So artistic license rather than biological observation here. But we need it for to show a bit more brightness in the face. Another thing would be quite nice to have is some red spatter here and there, just to make it look a bit more exciting. There we go. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there. I think it looks like a lionfish. Remember, they are pretty devious characters. I don't want to go further in case I get a bit carried away with the heavy purples, and I don't want the whole thing to turn into one big swampy purple reef. So I'm going to leave it there. I think we've got the sense of the shimmering spines, and I think he doesn't look like a friendly fish, so that's the main thing. I did say at the beginning, didn't I, that he's my least favorite fish in the sea. So I'm hoping that I've got a little bit of that character across. Going to take you in and have a closer look at some of the details. I can manage that with it plugged in. Let's see. Okay, so oh, I'm hoping this hasn't been the wrong way around the whole time. You can see some of the shimmery feathery bits. And textures in the reef. And sort of transparent looking bits of fins. And the vibrant colours and stripes on the fish. And his eye, that evil looking eye. Okay. So next time you're in a restaurant, do remember that you want to eat lions and not parrots. I'm going to transfer back to my other, oops, it's not good. Trying to do this for you so that it does not need editing. So I'm hoping this last little bit wasn't a bit of a disaster with when the battery went low. It may have tripped out into the other view. I hope that's not going to be a problem. I'll check it before I send it on to you. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed seeing slightly different watercolor technique and a glimpse into my underwater life as it was when in the days of my scuba diving days, and as it is now, so that you can actually have an impact on helping the reefs to get healthier, have every chance of becoming as healthy as possible in today's age. I think I did forget to mention when we were talking about the parrotfish, the beautiful parrotfish, that parrotfish are one of the reasons why it's so tragic that they get eaten, apart from their strange life history. They are responsible for creating a huge amount of the white sand on the beaches. They go around and graze off the corals and get rid of the algae. And in the process, they nibble off little bits of the coral calcium carbonate skeleton. And those get put through, it's almost like a mill in their digestive system. And when it comes out the other end, it's fine white coral sand. And that is so important for the health of the beaches and the inshore areas. And so that's why parrotfish are really key. Keeping up their population and their numbers is critical to the health of the reefs overall. So I really do hope that the next time you have a choice, you'll choose to eat lionfish and not parrotfish. So remember, eat lions, not parrots. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to contact me, you can find me at my website. It's just susanclaire.art. And if you want to take a look at my Patreon site, it's Patreon, patreon.com/Susan Clare. Thank you very much for watching.